Hey, welcome to Friday. Welcome to Friday's MLB parlay of the day. That's right. We're going to give you a 3-leg baseline parlay, as we call it. Then we're going to tell you about a couple of things going on here on the Odd Shopper site, some things that you can take advantage of, like at a sports book or a premium insider access. And then we're going to supersize the shit out of this because the large fries aren't big enough for you. The large soda is not big enough for you. Instead, we need to pay the extra $1.09, $1.10, whatever it was before they took that thing off the menu to get that gigantic, humongous Coke, Pepsi, whatever the hell we can say here. And that is what we're going to do for your parlay. So let's head on over, hit the thumbs up button. Please hit the thumbs up button. Please subscribe. It's not just you hitting the thumbs up button and then we just say, all right, that's it. Like, we want you subscribed here as well. We want you a part of what's going on here in the Odd Shopper community, because it is a community. And we're going to open up with the Braves winning this baseball game. Max Fried versus Jacob deGrom. We saw what happened last time deGrom was out there. In fact, we took advantage of him being victimized in the first inning on the NRFI video. This case here, we're going to target, for me at least, we're going to target the Braves because of the desperation now that the Mets still feel. And it's also combined with how poorly deGrom was the last time. Now, this is it, right? Like, this is the series that everybody's going to be watching. A team as tight as the Mets have been, where you've seen them constantly look back and lose games as a result of not paying attention to the team they're playing, but still focused on the team that was trying to catch them in the Braves. Now with Max Fried on the hill, who is far from awful or bad or anything along those lines, the 2.50 ERA, and you see what he's been able to do even still with that whip. Mets come in just one game. After all of this, a week to go, just one game left. So this part of the season where there are so many teams that are just done, cooked, dead, we're going to take advantage of desperation. We're going to take advantage of what's in front of us, and we can monetize this. Absolutely. You're going to get a first-round bye here for winning the division. Clearly, there's a lot that the Braves have been playing for. And all Atlanta needs to do is lose in order to see the Mets clinch. If the Mets win twice this weekend, the only way the Braves could win the division is if they sweep the Marlins in the final series of the season and New York gets swept by the Nationals. Braves are motivated, folks, and I want to be a part of this. Absolutely want to be a part of this. All right, our next play, mentioned, you got a team that's cooked here in the Marlins. It's kind of hard to tell Sandy Alcantara, like, hey, man, just slow down a little bit here. Just pull up a little bit, right? This is not a race. It's not a jockey, anything along those lines. You've got two really good pitchers today. You've got Sandy Alcantara going up against Corbin Burnes. We already know Miami on the road doesn't hit well. We already know Miami at home doesn't hit well. The Brewers go up against one of the best pitchers in both leagues, and it's not even close. This is a very difficult hitting matchup for both teams. Either you look at it in the sense of Milwaukee, right? And however well you think they've been hitting, the fact that now, and again, we talk about where they are in the standings a couple of times over with desperation, what have you. But it's just hard for me to think that either team has any clear-cut advantage here at the plate. And even if you get a couple of runs here, they're going to come off of a solo shot, a walk, something along those lines. Doesn't mean that guys aren't going to get hits. I mean, let me just stop right there. It doesn't mean that at all. But again, for a Brewers team that's a half game out heading into tonight, we'll see what happens with the Phillies in the doubleheader. They're going to be aggressive. They need this baseball game in the sense of desperation again, but you're going up against one of the top arms, under 13 and a half hits, 13 combined hits with Burnes and Alcantara seems like a lot. So we'll stay away from a large offensive explosion in that game and simply target an under 13 and a half total hits. I don't think you're going to get 6 or 7 hits from either team. You're lucky to get 4 hits, I think, from both teams combined. 8 hits total would be somewhere that I would think would be a reasonable number. Last, Brady Singer. How many times have we targeted Brady Singer? How many times have we taken advantage of the Royals because they are awful, just a shit-sucking team? But how many times have we told you about Brady Singer being a sneaky spot here? Aaron Savali is not fantastic, and Cleveland's already wrapped this sucker up. So there isn't anything at the moment right now for a Guardians team that's amazing that they're double digits ahead of the White Sox, but that's just how Ben Raza ruined the White Sox for everybody this year, which is fine. It happens. He's also made us a lot of money, so we can't really complain. But Brady Singer, Royals money line. This is another opportunity to target a bad baseball team with a lone bright spot. And it's worked for us in the past, especially with the value that's presented, because the majority of people aren't looking at a guy who's 10-4 with a 2.99 ERA. Look, Savali is not good, and Singer is not winning by striking everybody out. He's winning through technique, and he's winning through placement, and he's winning with a little gas, granted. But this is not, if he doesn't strike anybody out, he's not going to win the game. I'll take Brady Singer, Alex, at plus 110. Or technically, I guess now it's Ken. All right, we don't.
New intro music. All right, what is going on, guys? It is time for the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. It's Fridays, and whenever we get to Friday, Adam and I are always in a little bit of a time crunch because Fridays have been, Mike, can you turn the music off? All right, there we go. Yeah, just got the Halloween music blasting there. So Fridays, we have 14 game slates, and we're always up against it to get all the games in because we have so much content on the YouTube channel on Fridays. So guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel because we've got On the Contrary after this. Then we've got the NHL, NFL show, and then we've got MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock. So Adam and I are going to have to be out of here in 55 minutes. We've got 14 games to break down. So we're sponsored by Prize Picks today. If you guys haven't checked out Prize Picks, you can click on the link below. And when you sign up at Prize Picks, you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Really good way to help start building that bankroll over there. Also, when you sign up at Prize Picks for the first time, you get a free month of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package. So you're really getting good value there. And you'll find all the tools you need to build some winning player prop cards over on Prize Picks. But Adam, 14 games today. The MLB season starting to wind down. We've got like a week and a half or so left here. How are you feeling about some of these final slates and today in particular?
Oh yeah, big slate. And at the end of the year, I think we've talked about it before. Like nothing changes too much for me, especially now that they don't have the super expanded rosters that they used to. But I do think it's important just still to keep an eye, especially when it comes to pitching, on what teams have to play for, especially being especially cautious, I think, with teams that have the postseason locked up and have no incentive to push their pitchers, as far as they can possibly go. So it's a minor thing, but end the season, I think that's just one thing to always keep in mind.
Yeah, and one thing that is nice about today is we have lines for all the games except for one, and that's actually the first game we have to talk about today, and that is because it is the second part of a doubleheader. We've got Mike's Philadelphia Phillies, who are, I can't believe the wheels have totally fallen off. This is an epic collapse by the Phillies. They've lost 5 games in a row now. It looks like they were nearly a lock to make the playoffs. So if I'm not mistaken, FanGraphs had them at something like a 96% chance to make the playoffs 2 weeks ago. And now they're not even favored to make the playoffs at this point. So tail end of a doubleheader today. They're taking on the Washington Nationals. We do have Noah Syndergaard on the mound for Philadelphia tonight. Anibal Sanchez for Washington. So 2 pretty bad pitching options. Safe to assume the focus here is going to be on the offenses.
Yeah, and first of all, I don't think this game even plays. But obviously, we don't have to worry about that right now. Yeah. But this area is supposed to start getting the effects of Ian this afternoon. So doubt this game plays, but if it does, not really interested in either pitcher. Syndergaard, not a great strikeout pitcher at this point. of his career. Does a decent job getting ground balls and all of that, but he's 7,900. Good matchup, but it's just a big enough slate where I don't think you're really going to need to get there. And then for Anibal Sanchez at 6,500, just no real interest in him against the Phillies. Relatively difficult matchup, relatively not good pitcher. 15.6% strikeout percentage, 11.2% walk percentage as a starter this year. Just not somebody I'm going to need to get to on this slate.
Yeah, and to Adam's point before, pay attention to the weather, and especially this weekend. The weather, I think, is going to end up being pretty much a disaster for some baseball games, just with the hurricane coming up the coast. And at least for today, this is the game with the most risk. So we'll have to see what ends up happening. But it does seem like rain is going to be a pretty big issue in this game if it is something that ends up still not getting canceled by the time we get later here. But in terms of offenses, which one of them stands out the most to you? Because the pitchers here, two pitchers that we don't really like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clearly the Phillies because, for one, as much as I hate Noah Syndergaard and as much as I don't think he's very good, he's still decent at limiting production. 0.99 home runs per 9 this year, 4.33 xFIP, and the Nats are clearly just a worse offense, pretty much top to bottom, than the Phillies. Sanchez, on the other hand, 1.8 home runs per 9, 5.4 xFIP. You're facing a lineup that, instead of having CJ Abrams and Luis Garcia and Lane Thomas, you have Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper and Rhys Hoskins. It's just much, much, much better offense for Philadelphia.
Yeah, totally agree. They're also right now expected to be the most popular offense on the slate by a mile, projected for right around 17% ownership, whereas there's not another single team on the slate even projected for north of 10% ownership. But it's going to depend on the weather. So watch all the content later on in the day when we have a better idea of whether that game plays or not. Next game, we have the New York Yankees against the Baltimore Orioles, and the Orioles, sorry to say it, Adam, but starting to getting close to the point where they're going to be eliminated from playoff contention.
I actually thought they were yesterday, but maybe not.
Oh, were they? I thought they were.
I could be wrong. I thought with them losing and Seattle winning, they were done, but maybe not.
It is possible. Let me say that doesn't matter. But either way, well, I guess it could matter from this standpoint. It could be a really watered down version of the Orioles lineup if they decide to go that way. And we've seen that happen sometimes this year. Teams get eliminated, like the White Sox did the other day, basically rested everybody. Or sometimes when teams clinch, they opt to end up resting everybody. So do pay attention to what the Orioles lineup ends up looking like. But Domingo Germán on the mound for the Yankees, and this is a spot where I'd like to say, hey, we could take advantage of a watered down Baltimore Orioles lineup if that is what ends up happening. But Domingo Germán has been limited on a pitch count as of late, and it's hard to think he's going to go very deep into the game.
Yeah, agreed. And obviously pay attention to the lineup. ESPN has them with a sub 0.1% chance, so I guess they probably weren't technically eliminated, but they would need to win out and have multiple teams lose out or something. I don't know. I'm not too worried about I don't think it's likely they have a watered down lineup because, for one, their young guys are their best players. So those are the guys that typically you would be putting in. And then also they did get rest days for half their team against Rich Hill a couple of days ago. So I expect a normal Orioles lineup one way or the other. But yeah, to your point with Germán, just the 14-game slate, not somebody that I think I really need to get to here. From a pitch count standpoint, I lost that page, but the Yankees, obviously clinched. There's no reason for them to really push him to go too deep into this game. Recently, in his most recent start, he went 5 innings through 66 pitches. So yeah, even if you're talking, 70, 75 pitches at 7,600, it's tough to really want to get there.
Yeah, and then as for the other side of the game, we've got Jordan Lyles on the mound for Baltimore going up against the Yankees. And the Yankees recently did rest everybody after clinching the division. So I assume we're going to be getting a full Yankees lineup today against Jordan Lyles. As per usual with the Yankees, they've been not all that popular lately outside of Aaron Judge. So even when you're looking at the team's aggregate ownership, it's really weighted towards Judge. If you're playing 5-man Yankees lineups, it generally tends to be a lineup that isn't all that well owned. And when it comes to Jordan Lyles, he hasn't been terrible this year, but he is a pitcher that gives up a lot of fly balls and also has been home run prone at times in the past. I think this is a decent spot for the Yankees, assuming they've got all the regulars in there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and you're getting him out of Camden Yards as well. He's allowed a 151 actual ISO, but a 183 expected ISO to righties this year. I know Yankee Stadium is better for left-handed bats, but there still isn't a 380-foot wall in left field in Yankee Stadium like there is in Jordan Lyles' home park. So that sets up, nicely. He's given up power to both sides of the plate, 193 expected ISO, 217 actual to lefties. So certainly very interested in, Anthony Rizzo in particular, Oswaldo Cabrera at a pretty cheap price tag. But the righties here look good as well. And then one other additional point, and it's something that I don't talk about too much on these shows because it's not super actionable, but it does just it is just kind of another point in the Yankees' direction. The Orioles bullpen is just taxed at this point. They really, really had to work a lot in that Red Sox series. So if they are able to get to Jordan Lyles early here, you're just going to get some overworked pitchers coming out of the O's pen. Just gives you a little bit better chance of adding on runs throughout the game.
Yeah, that Red Sox Orioles series was ridiculous. I don't know what it was that happened, but it was like every game the pitching got totally destroyed. Then there was the one game also where there was the rain delay and pitchers came out early, so that was problematic. Yeah. But yeah,
that was Jordan Lyles' last start, so he's actually on short rest here too. Which I'm not. That it doesn't matter to me, but it is another point where it's like, yeah, there's I guess an increased chance that Jordan Lyles just comes out flat because it's a weird routine for him.
Yeah, so Yankees team, I think they're going to go a little bit under-owned, and it might not even be totally represented in the top stacks tool because you've got Aaron Judge who's going to be picking up ownership, and the rest of the players just going to be low-owned across the Yankees lineup. Moving on to the next game, the Toronto Blue Jays against the Boston Red Sox, and just like the Orioles bullpen is taxed, so is the Red Sox because they just played that brutal series against each other where the scores were like 13-9, and starters were pitching 2-3 innings. So we've got Nick Pivetta on the mound for Boston, and he's been decent this year, 4.48 expected ERA, 23% K rate. I'm surprised how low the Blue Jays team total is in this game. Not that they're my favorite stack or anything like that on the slate, but I do think that this is a team where it's just being a little bit overlooked. I think by the books, when you consider that the implied team total for the Blue Jays is 3.9, I wouldn't be surprised.
5.
Oh, did I? Let me see if the place I pulled the team totals from might have been incorrect. And okay, yeah, that was the issue. So the place
3.9 would be weird.
Yeah, 3.9 would be weird. I was looking at that. I was like, boy, I want to bet that later in the day. That's why it's not the case. So yeah, nearly 5 runs for Toronto Blue Jays. That is much more reasonable going up against Nick Pivetta. And then also, like I said before, that taxed Red Sox bullpen. The Blue Jays are another team that I think makes sense to pay up for.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And it's nice too. I mean, obviously on 14 game slates, raw ownership doesn't get pushed up as much anyway. But because maybe you have Philadelphia against Anibal Sanchez, you do have the Dodgers against Chad Kuhl. You have, the Angels facing Glenn Otto. Nick Pivetta is not a great pitcher, but he's certainly better than the guys, that I just mentioned. And so it's going to just make the Blue Jays not get as much ownership. Right now we have them with a 6% chance of being the top stack, 6% projected ownership. They're in the Rogers Center, good park to hit in. You have Nick Pivetta, who does give up some power, 188 expected ISO to righties this year, 166 to lefties. He's had home run issues pretty much throughout his career. And so it just creates a situation where, the top of the Blue Jays lineup's expensive, but it should be. The bottom of it helps you balance that out. Not the best hitters, but 3K Whit Merrifield with MPE is nice. Ramel Tapia, 2,300 will offset some of that Guerrero, Bichette, Springer salary. So I think it's a really high upside spot. And like you said, same thing as the Orioles game. I'm not saying play the Blue Jays because the Red Sox bullpen is, well, 1, bad and 2, gassed, but it certainly doesn't hurt that, if you can get to Pivetta and get him out of this game in the 3rd inning, you're just going to have a bunch of tired dudes coming out there.
Yeah, and then on the mound for the Blue Jays, finally a decent pitcher to talk about on the slate. That is Alec Manoa. Now, in terms of the other pay-up options, there's better ones to look at on the slate with all things being considered. Manoa, the matchup against the Red Sox, isn't quite ideal. I'm certainly not looking to stack the Red Sox against him, but 2% ownership for Manoa right now on DK. On FanDuel, he is projected for less than 1% ownership. Is this a contrarian pitcher to back tonight?
Yes and no. I think that he's going under-owned at 2%. I think he's a good pitcher. The issue I have is just the other pitchers on this slate. It's a Jacob deGrom slate. It's a Corbin Burns slate. You have Clayton Kershaw in a really good matchup at a similar price point to Manoa. And Manoa also, he's kind of like Max Fried, who also is on this slate. He's a good real-life pitcher. I think Fried's better. But my point is, it's a 23% strikeout percentage on the year for Manoa. So he's a good real life pitcher, but he's not that same level of strikeout pitcher that a lot of other guys are. And that's really what, piles up points in DFS. So tough matchup for Manoa. Obviously not a great park to pitch in. Good pitcher, but I think that the low ownership makes sense just given the alternatives on this slate.
Yeah, so I think that's probably where I'm at too. Technically, like you said, per the data, should Alec Manoa be more than 0.6% owned on FanDuel or 2% on DK? Probably. But that doesn't mean I ultimately end up getting to him when I build lineups, but not going to stack against him either. It's a spot that ultimately I'm just not going to have interest in.
Yeah, he's just one of those pitchers, and there's always going to be these guys, and there's a lot of them today, I think, where if you go back and look at if you're playing 150 lineups or something, or you're playing one lineup. But either way, I don't think you should just be like jamming in Alec Manoa saying like, oh, he's 2% owned. This is like the best play on the slate. I think he can be useful in specific lineups where, let's say this ownership holds and the Philadelphia game plays and all of that. You really want to, let's say you really want to stack Philly and I don't know, you mix in like Aaron Judge somehow or whoever else is popular from a hitter standpoint. That's where Alec Manoa fits in. You're getting a pitcher that's good, that certainly can give you a good game. He's getting you a really low owned lineup. But in most lineups, you're going to be saving enough ownership elsewhere where you can just play guys that project better than Manoa.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. And now moving on to the next game, Cleveland Guardians at home against the Kansas City Royals. The pitching matchup in the spot, really not bad. Aaron Savali for Cleveland, Brady Singer for Kansas City. It's kind of weird because I think that I look at these pitchers and like, all right, they're both decent, but I like other pitchers better than Savali. Brady Singer, the matchup against Cleveland. I don't really like taking pitchers against Cleveland all that often, especially because we just talked about how many pitchers there are to pay up for on this slate. I don't know if there's anything I really love getting to in this game.
No, it's the same for me. Brady Singer is good. He's also like the only Royals pitcher that I don't roster constantly, him and Greinke. I wish that wasn't the case, but it's just difficult to get there. Like you said, Cleveland, a very, very difficult strikeout matchup. Singer is a good pitcher, 24% strikeout percentage, 3.3 xFIP, former first round pick, highly regarded prospect. It seems like, one of Kansas City's young pitching prospects at least is finally panning out, but still a really, really tough matchup to get strikeouts. It's not like you're getting him at a really reduced salary. 8,200's fine, but it's not like he's way underpriced. And then on the other side, Plesac coming in at 6,800, I think.
Savali.
Savali.
Yeah, unless it's Savali. When I was looking earlier, Savali was the...
Yeah, I'm seeing Savali too, except for the one spot where I was looking. Savali coming in at 7,700, but like you said, he's solid, but not somebody that I really want to get to on this slate.
Yeah, and it's a good matchup for him as well against Kansas City, but still, it's really where his price tag is at, and then just all the other pitching options we have to choose from, and it being a big slate, it's not that hard to find salary to go a little bit more expensive at pitcher. Like if I'm rostering somebody at this price point on DK, I think that Alex Cobb is a better pitcher than Savali. He's at home. It's a really pitcher-friendly park. He's drawing Arizona. We have a better projection on him, and he's lesser owned. Like that's the guy that I'd be looking to above all others in this price tag if I'm getting contrarian, and I just can't play everybody. So Cobb is the guy that I really like in this spot over the Savali price tag.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. Like it's not like it's a bad matchup against KC, but I'm with you as far as Cobb being a better pitcher. Slightly higher strikeout percentage. xFIP is like a run better. Doesn't give up power. He's in San Francisco. So yeah, like I think Savali's fine. I think I like Cobb a little bit better, especially if he's going to get less ownership, like you said.
Next game we have here, the Detroit Tigers at home against the Minnesota Twins. Twins also a team recently eliminated from playoff contention, but they have a good young pitcher on the mound, Joe Ryan, who got off to a really, really good start early in the season. He's faded a little bit as the year's gone on, but overall the numbers, 3.63 expected ERA, 24.7% K rate. We know how good of a matchup it has been for right-hand pitchers going up against the Detroit Tigers. So is Joe Ryan a pitcher that's going to be in the mix for you today?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised he's only getting 10% ownership here. We have him with a 9% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. One thing I am interested in here is Ryan's got really drastic strikeout splits between lefties and righties. He's struck out 30.3% of righties this year, 18.9% of lefties. The Tigers have a left-handed heavy lineup, but they're also really bad lefties that strike out a lot. So I'm curious to see which side wins out here. Like, are they able to actually hit the ball, or does Joe Ryan just pile up strikeouts against left-handed hitters? I think it's probably the latter. Like, I think it's a very good spot for Ryan. You have a 3.2 implied run total for the Tigers. I guess I understand the ownership in the sense that, there's just so much pitching on this slate. Obviously, DeGrom's going to get a lot. Burns is going to get a lot. And then you're just competing with, Kershaw and Darvish and Gilbert, Gilbert 8,400 against Oakland. So I guess I understand why he's only getting 10%, but I do like him in tournaments given that I think he's got a very high ceiling given his overall strikeout ability.
Yeah, and then the pitcher on the other side of the game, not nearly as good. Tyler Alexander, 5.26 expected ERA, 13.2% K rate. So the Minnesota Twins offense, I know that it has really struggled in the later portions of the season, and no Byron Buxton there. He hasn't played for a really long period of time. We don't know if they're going to be playing all of the regulars in this game, but Tyler Alexander is such a bad pitcher, and the Twins lineup, whoever's in there, it does look like it's going to be a pretty cheap lineup. But I think this is a good source of salary savings.
Yeah, I agree. I thought they'd actually be getting a little bit more ownership. Maybe they will, as the day goes on, but 7.5% aggregate ownership when they lead the slate with a 13.2% top value percentage is very reasonable. 5% chance of being the top stack in addition to that high top value percentage. Jose Miranda at 3,500 is just going to be one of the best first base options. Correa at 4,800 looks like one of the best shortstops. Gary Sanchez at 3K looks like a very good catcher option. And one thing with Alexander too, he hasn't been good against lefties either. So we can get back to my daily Nick Gordon recommendation with MPE as well. I don't think you should be shying away from him, especially if you're stacking. 239 expected ISO to lefties for Alexander, 202 to righties. It just sets up as a really good spot for a pretty cheap Minnesota team. I'm surprised they only have a 3.9 implied run total. I guess it's because it's like 60 degrees in Detroit, and I guess also they're not very good, but yeah, kind of surprised it's not, 4.2 or something.
And then one other thing I'll add, and this is going to transition us into the next game, is to me, when I'm looking at the top stacks tool, the top value, top stack, they kind of have different weights for me on any given day. And this is a day where the value becomes very important to me because we've got so many high-end starting pitchers on the slate. And one we're about to talk about is Jacob deGrom going up against the Atlanta Braves. Now, I know that deGrom is coming off a rough start against the A's, and that was one of the weirder outings that we've seen of the entire season where deGrom legitimately got hit really hard by Oakland. But his numbers overall for the year, 2.03 expected ERA rate, 41.9% K rate. I know the Braves are good. And despite the bad matchup the bad outing he just had against Oakland, I generally consider deGrom to be somewhat matchup proof. And I want to play him as much as possible. And that's why some of those value stacks are going to hold more importance to me because I really want to play a bunch of deGrom today. Where do you stand with him?
Oh yeah, completely agree. It's also not a bad strikeout matchup against the Braves. Yeah, it's a dangerous matchup in that they have a lot of really good hitters, but there's a lot of upside there. And like you said, almost a 42% strikeout percentage this year for deGrom. That last start against Oakland got his xFIP all the way up to 1.6. Like, just unbelievably good pitcher. And the thing is too, and you were saying from the value standpoint, even if you don't get to deGrom, you also have Burns, Kershaw, Valdez, Darvish, Alcantara. Like, you just have so many guys to pay up for here. But deGrom clearly, to me, the top projected guy. We have him about 2 points ahead of Corbin Burns, who is second. And yeah, he's as good as it gets. He's matchup proof for me. And I think you have to keep in mind too, like, it's all everything. Like, there's so many different factors here. Yeah, it's not an ideal matchup against the Braves, but that's why you're getting 36% ownership to deGrom instead of 60. If he was facing like the A's, he would be 60, and we'd all just be pissed off later. But it's kind of just a sliding scale everywhere. It's like, oh yeah, I wish he wasn't facing the Braves, but if I'm going to get him at 1/3 of the field playing him instead of 2/3 of the field, that's pretty cool too.
And then on the other side, Max Fried has also been a really quality starting pitcher, one of the better pitchers in the National League for the season. If I'm not mistaken, he's like third or fourth in Cy Young odds. Like, Sandy Alcantara has won the award. He's also pitching today, but still Max Fried potentially could be a finalist. Now, in terms of his FanDuel price, I don't really think he's playable at 10,000. But on DraftKings, Fried's kind of interesting because the one knock against him this year has always been that, well, the strikeout rate isn't all that high, but his price has come all the way down to $8,800 over on DK. He's only 3% owned. It is a little bit of uphill climb to get the win bonus just because deGrom is on the other side and the matchup is really tough. But what do you make of Max Fried when he's one of the cheapest price points we've seen on him this season?
Well, you forgot the really important part, the narrative that the Mets can't score runs for Jacob deGrom anyway.
That's true as well.
Sets up really well for Fried. But I think he's very similar to Manoa for me. I kind of had brought him up when I was talking about Manoa without even realizing he was pitching today at the time. I agree with you. It's a good price tag for how good Max Fried is. He's not getting much ownership. I think if you look at like individual ownership, like Max Fried's getting 3.5%. Logan Gilbert for 400 less is getting 22.5. Certainly I prefer Gilbert against Oakland, but not 8-1. But realistically, when you're making DFS lineups, I just don't think it's going to be a spot that I end up just getting a ton of Fried. But certainly somebody like I was saying with Manoa, where if you just have a chalky build and you're at that price point where most people would just put in Logan Gilbert, then sure, put in Max Fried. He gives you the same range of outcomes. He's a very, very, very good pitcher. It's not a very good spot. So I think he fits in those types of lineups, but like, I'm not expecting to just start jamming in Max Fried against the Mets just because he's 3%.
Yeah, and we're about to talk about even more high-end starting pitchers because the next pitching matchup, Corbin Burns, Sandy Alcantara. But first, if you guys want access to all the tools that we have over at Stokastic.com, not just for baseball, but also for all the other DFS sports that are out there. NFL season, that's obviously ongoing. And basketball, we're only a couple weeks away from the NBA season starting. I'm really excited for that. So if you want a Stokastic Plus Platinum package, you could sign up right now using the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get you 50% off your first week of the package. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. Now, talking about the next pitching matchup we have here, like I just alluded to, it's a good one. We've got Sandy Alcantara for the Marlins. We've got Corbin Burnes for the Brewers. What are you going to be doing with these two guys, and how do they compare to Jacob deGrom?
I think Burnes looks like the second best option on the slate behind DeGrom. We have him projected for 23.6 DraftKings points behind DeGrom's 25.6. He's a really good pitcher. He's got a really good matchup against Miami. They have a 2.6 implied run total. Burnes for the season has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 30.3%. Now that is still 12 points behind Jacob deGrom somehow. But 2.94 xFIP. He's one of the best non-Jacob deGrom, one of the best human pitchers in baseball, and it's a really good matchup against the Marlins. Milwaukee also still has things to play for, so just like with the Mets and the Braves, this is a game where you don't have to worry about the ace pitcher being pulled early just because the team wants to rest him or anything. Milwaukee's a half game out of the third spot behind the Phillies in the National League wild card. So if Burnes is pitching well, he's going to get his full leash and all of that. So I think he looks really good. You're also getting him at a cheaper price tag to DeGrom. He's getting similar ownership. To me, these are just clearly the top two pitchers on the slate.
Yeah. And then also when it comes to Alcantara on the other side, he's a pretty interesting contrarian play to me because we know how good he's been this year. The Marlins have also let him work deeper into games than most other teams let their pitchers go. And part of that's probably a push to win the Cy Young Award, which is also why I don't think we're all of a sudden going to start seeing him limited at this point, because the team, really what I think the team is playing for more than anything at this point is to make sure that Sandy wins the Cy Young. So his 2.97 expected ERA, 23.2% K rate, the upside's a little hidden there just because you could get the 8th or 9th inning out of him that you don't see out of a lot of other pitchers. So when you look at him as only being 4% owned, I think he makes a lot of sense to pay up to be contrarian with and differentiate some lineups that would otherwise have a deGrom or a Corbin Burnes in them. Are you going to be getting to Alcantara today?
Yes, I mean, I like your point about the hidden upside there, because like doing these shows, you get like really in the habit of just talking about strikeout percentage and all of that, because like for the most part, top end pitchers still have like the same leash more or less. But Alcantara leads all of baseball by more than 20 innings pitched. He has thrown 220 and 2/3 innings this year. Next is Miles Michaelis at 199 and a third. So it's not even close like how much deeper into games he goes. And it's not like he's a bad strikeout pitcher. He's just in that same range with like Alec Manoa and Max Fried coming in at 23.2%. I still think it's difficult with the price tag at 10.9 just because, he's only $800 less expensive $800 less expensive than DeGrom. He's $400 more than Burnes. He's just like, to me, the upper tier Alec Manoa, Max Fried, where I certainly prefer DeGrom, I prefer Burnes, but if I just have a lineup that is really chalky and the just standard build would be to get to one or both of those guys, using Alcantara still gives you massive upside at lower ownership.
Yeah, and there was a point where I did think maybe they would limit his innings a little bit down the stretch of the season. In his last two starts, 8 innings and 9 innings. It's like, all right, they're just trying to do whatever they can to get him the Cy Young Award and boost up his overall counting stats. Because like you said, his innings pitch just ridiculous compared to the other pitchers that we have in the way that we see pitchers generally being used in terms of trying to limit innings and stuff like that and get to bullpens earlier. That's just not been the case with Alcantara.
Among qualified starters this year, not named Sandy Alcantara, there have been 14 complete games. He has 5. So he's accounted for like 25% of all complete games by qualified starters this year.
Does any other pitcher even have multiple?
Valdez has 3, Nola has 2.
Yeah. So, I mean, those two guys have accounted for like 50% of them combined. But either way, Alcantara running away with the Cy Young at this point. He's only 4% owned. I don't mind him as a contrarian pitching option. Moving on to the next game, and actually one of the other pitchers you just mentioned, Framber Valdez. He is a 3.32 expected ERA, a 23.3% K rate. He is pitching at home today against the Tampa Bay Rays. Now, here's where I get a little bit concerned about Framber Valdez in terms of he doesn't have the strikeout upside, and I don't think there's any reason for the Astros to push their starting pitchers to go too deep into games at this point. The Astros have had the division locked up for a considerable period of time now. Some of the recent starts for Valdez, last start, 5 1/3 innings. The one before that, 6 innings. Now, I do know that his pitch count wasn't, super efficient in those starts, but I don't think he's all that likely to go the 7, 8, 9 innings that we've seen in the past. And considering all the other high-end pitchers we have today, it's hard for me to reasonably want to get to Framber Valdez.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if I just had to guess, like, even money does he have a normal workload or not? I would guess that he does. But I agree with you in that there's no guarantee. Like, for sure the Mets are not just going to surprisingly pull Jacob deGrom to limit his pitch count or something. There's a non-zero chance Houston's just like, yeah, cool, you're done. Like, good 5 innings, get out of there. I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but it's at least greater than 0, whereas with deGrom and Burns, it is non-existent. But then on top of that, like you said, the strikeout stuff just not in line with other pay up options today. 23.3% strikeout percentage. He's basically Sandy Alcantara, but without the sort of guaranteed workload. Still likely to go pretty deep into the game, but I think he's a very similar play. We have him getting 5% ownership. We have Alcantara getting 4%. 10,700 for Valdez. They're just very similar to me, where if I need to offset ownership at the top, then fine, you can go there, you get a nice ceiling. But like more often than not, I'm just going to get lower owned bats and get as much DeGrom and Burns as I can.
This slate is so loaded at pitching. I'm just kind of going through this as we're talking. It's like, boy, there aren't that many offenses we've talked about that we really like. And it's because every team has their best pitcher on the mound today for the most part. And it just kind of makes it hard to reasonably talk about some of these offenses as ones we want to back. And it's kind of the same thing on the other side of this game where Drew Rasmussen is on the mound for the Rays. He's a 3.47 expected ERA this year, 21.9% K rate. Houston, you look at them, they only have a 3.8 implied team total today going up against him. So as far as other offense we've talked about, I guess Houston looks better than a lot of them, and they're really low owned at 1.7%, but it's a low implied team total. It's not the best matchup, and it's just not a team I'm dying to roster.
Yeah, same boat. Rasmussen's good. I don't see getting to him on this slate in this matchup, but on the other side, 3.7 implied run total for the Astros. I never mind getting to this team at low ownership, and they are only projected for like 2%, but it's just a really tough spot. Rasmussen this year, striking out 21.1% of righties with a 157 expected ISO, 23% of lefties with a 104 expected ISO. Outside of just saying, Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, Bregman, these guys are all really good and low owned. I don't really have much of a case to make for why I would like them.
All right, so let's talk about the next one. And this, to me, is a contrarian spot I could really get behind because we've got Jack Flaherty going up against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Flaherty has been just total dog shit this year. I still think there's potential for him to turn it around. But here are his numbers for the year. He's a 4.97 ERA, a 5.51 expected ERA, a 5.6 FIP. His velocity is down a pretty good amount. He's also been injured for a lot of the year. His strikeout rate is 18.7%. That's the lowest of his career. His walk rate is 14.4%. The Pirates' implied team total in this game is only 2.9 runs, which is really low and isn't the best indicator. But I think Jack Flaherty is getting a little bit too much respect just based on what his name is and that he's been good in the past, because there's not really a lot I could look at this year that indicates he's a good pitcher. Considering we want to pay up for offenses today, the Pirates are bringing up no ownership. I think it's a good team to take a chance on because Flaherty just might be bad right now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting spot because Flaherty, like you said, has just not been good this year. 18.7% strikeout percentage, 14.4% walk percentage, 5.29 xFIP. It is a good spot. It is a favorable price tag, but it's pretty scary getting to him and feeling confident. He is coming off of a good start against San Diego. That's good to see. Struck out 9 in 6 innings, struck out 5 in 5 innings to start before that against Cincinnati, gave up 4 runs to them as well. I don't mind getting to him at this price. Like, I still think that if we didn't have any of these concerns about Flaherty, he'd be 9K or whatever in this spot. He threw 99 pitches last time out, so that was good to see as well. He's getting 10% ownership. To me, that makes sense. Like, there is a lot of upside here in that if he just is rusty and getting back into form, and that San Diego start is the first of him just being normal, then he's clearly underpriced in a really good spot. But there is risk just based on what he's done this year. So given all of the top end pitching on this slate, I think it's hard to make him a true priority, but I do think he should be getting some ownership like he is.
And then what are you going to do with the Pirates on the other side? Because the thing that really does stand out to me about Pittsburgh is just that we have the chance that Flaherty is not a good pitcher right now. I think everything in this spot screams GPP upside because Flaherty's underpriced and not really all that popular. The Pirates are picking up less than 1% ownership. I hear that Flaherty has pitched a little bit better lately, but the numbers are so poor for the season. It wouldn't shock me if he goes out and just kind of gets lit up. His last start against the Pirates was 2 weeks ago. He pitched 5 innings, had 0 strikeouts and walked 4 guys. So we've seen some blow up starts for Flaherty. I could play the Pirates at no ownership today, play whatever pitchers I like, and I could reasonably say that there's upside based on how bad Flaherty's been.
I do agree with that, and especially like he's really struggled with lefties this year. 192 expected ISO, 250 actual, 364 expected WOBA. If you're going to gamble on Pirates bats, it's always preferable to do it against guys that struggle with lefties because any of their good hitters hit left-handed, with the exception of Brian Hayes. I hate the pricing here. I don't know how you possibly get O'Neill Cruz and Brian Reynolds both to $5,700. Like, not a knock on them, but that they shouldn't be the guys getting that price when, all season long we've had soft hitter pricing. So that makes it tough. Obviously the rest of this lineup lets you balance that out. Sawinski at 2,400, Castro at 3,300. Like, those guys are cheap enough. But I don't think I really get to the Pirates, but I do agree with your kind of upside case there.
Yeah, and like you said, we would have to be mixing in some of the other hitters in the Pirates lineup just because O'Neill Cruz and Reynolds are so expensive right now. But yeah, it is to me a pretty interesting spot, just considering that, you got a pitcher struggling against an offense that's generally struggled. And then other side of the game, we kind of have an interesting pitcher because Johan Oviedo has been sneaky good this year. And then he's also coming off a start where he pitched really well and was actually stretched out and was able to go 7 innings. So generally, we don't love pitchers going up against the St. Louis Cardinals, and I'm not going to be playing Oviedo himself in this spot. 3.02 expected ERA, 24.9% K rate. But where do the Cardinals look as an offense for you when you consider that Oviedo has been a pitcher that's looked pretty good this year?
Yeah, he's looked solid. I still like the Cardinals just because they are such a good offense, and you're going up against a still pretty unproven pitcher. They're getting about 3% ownership. We have them with about a 4% chance of being the top stack. So I think they look like a kind of solid middle of the road stack. They do look a little bit better just because, like you said, there's a lot of good pitching on this slate. So I'm more interested in spots like this than I would be if you just had, horrible pitching everywhere, especially if you lose that Philadelphia game and you have a bunch of, ownership that you need to give to other teams. So I do like the Cardinals at relatively low ownership. I'm not super confident in them because Oviedo has been solid.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And I know there was a point in time where I'd probably look at Johan Oviedo and think like, okay, this is a pitcher to stack against based on some of his results in the past. And I mean, even in the minor leagues this year, he kind of got lit up when he was pitching for the Cardinals. He made 10 minor league starts for St. Louis and had a 5.58 ERA and a 6.73 FIP. And he comes up to the major league and just considerably better, which is just weird, but he continues to do it. Moving on to the next game here, we have the Los Angeles Angels at home against the Texas Rangers. Reed Detmers on the mound for Los Angeles, 4.15 expected ERA, 21.9% K rate. One of the top pitching prospects in baseball coming into the year. The results have generally been mixed, but the way I look at this, I don't really want to stack the Rangers against him just because the Rangers offense hasn't had Corey Seager lately, and it just in general hasn't been a great offense this year. But there's too many good pitchers for me to really want to get to Reed Detmers either.
Yeah, it just strikes me as another one of these spots where it's like, oh, Detmers is good. I don't really want to go to Texas, and I also don't really want to go to Detmers because all of the other pitchers are better. I do think, it is a good park to hit in. Marcus Semien at 4,500 is reasonable. Garcia at 4,200. Josh Jung still underpriced at 2,600. So there is some power upside there for cheap. You could get Seager back too. He's day-to-day after getting hit by a pitch a few games ago. But Detmers has been solid this year. He's a highly regarded pitching prospect. 150 expected ISO to righties, 123 to lefties. He's just another pitcher that is solid. Not much really stands out as far as like how you would take advantage of him. Texas is projected for 8% ownership with a 4% chance of being the top stack. They also have a 6% chance of being the top value. So I think the ownership probably is more or less where it should be. They're just kind of a middle of the road team to me again.
Yeah, and then the Angels are picking up some ownership going against Glenn Otto because Otto, one of the worst pitchers on the slate. 5.09 expected ERA, 17.7% K rate. The Angels have been in a lot of spots lately where they've ended up being popular, and a lot of them have been for good reason. And this is another spot where I think we could justify getting to the Angels, maybe a little bit overowned, but amongst all the pitchers we talked about today, Glenn Otto is clearly one of the worst.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'm not overly concerned about the Angels ownership either, since a lot of that is just going to be Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, and they are both really, really, really good. I don't really care too much about, them getting 12% ownership. They called up, I don't know if he'll start, obviously I don't have the lineup, but their top prospect, Logan O'Hoppe, made his major league debut 2 games ago. He's a catcher. He's 2,100. Hit well in Double-A this year. Who knows what he's going to do at the major league level at this point, but he's a $2,100 catcher that at least has some upside. Rengifo is pretty much always a solid play at this price. Taylor Ward looks good. So I do like the Angels here. I think Otto is one of the weaker pitchers on the slate. 171 expected ISO to righties, 180 to lefties, about a 17.5% strikeout percentage. Angels look good to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also the point you said before is while the Angels, yeah, they look a little bit overowned, but it's just because of ownership going to Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, 5-man stacks. Like, I don't think people are going to be playing the other hitters in this lineup all that often. So the 5-man stacks should be relatively modestly owned. I like into the Angels against Glenn Otto. The next spot is the San Diego Padres at home against the Chicago White Sox. Yu Darvish on that, another ace starting pitcher who, after struggling with strikeouts earlier in the year and having what was by far the worst strikeout year of his career, has really picked it up as the season's gone on. 3.58 expected ERA, strikeout rate now all the way back up to 25.7%. He's got a good matchup against the White Sox, especially because the White Sox have been playing really watered down versions of their lineup as of late. But the question becomes with Yu Darvish, how much of a priority can he be when we have so many other good pitchers?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you're getting like 16% ownership here. And I think it makes sense. 10,100. It's not like he's cheap, but it's a pretty fair price tag. The White Sox are a pretty mediocre matchup in terms of strikeouts and production. But Darvish has struck out 25.7% of hitters this year, like you said. That's fourth on the slate behind DeGrom, Burns, and Kershaw. 3.57 xFIP. He's another one where, you know, in individual lineups, if you move some of him, like you have the salary and you move some of him to Valdez or Alcantara, I think that makes sense. But I do think Darvish should be getting the most ownership out of that group, considering that he is the least expensive. He does have the best strikeout percentage. He just looks like a solid pitcher here.
Yeah, 2.9 implied team total for Chicago White Sox. That's a really, really low number. And then starting for Chicago, it's Davis Martin. And this is a pitcher who 4.39 expected ERA isn't bad, but a 16.8% K rate. He does not generate very many swing and misses. So the San Diego Padres, this is one of the first offenses we've talked about that's in a good spot, that's really not picking up ownership. 4% ownership going to San Diego against Martin. I think this is a team to be overweight to the field on.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're only getting 4% ownership as well. I really like getting to them because they obviously have a lot of really good hitters. You have Soto pulling 12%. Next highest is Machado at 8. They're relatively expensive, especially, you know, if you're including Soto and Machado. But the rest of the team's not that expensive. You know, Cronenworth's 4,600, but Bell is pretty cheap at 3,700. You can use Nola to offset some salary. If Azucar is in the lineup at 2K, you know, he's a solid fifth guy into the stack to offset some of that. So I don't think they're going to be that difficult to get to. And yeah, only a 4.4 implied run total, kind of surprising. Martin has done a decent job limiting power this year. 167 expected ISO to lefties, 133 to righties. But I just kind of like betting on the Padres' talent at relatively little ownership.
Yeah, and something else also, Davis Martin is 25 years old. He's an unranked prospect, and he had fairly poor results in the minor leagues throughout his career. So AAA this year, Martin a 6.11 ERA, a 4.9 FIP. Last year in AA, a 3.54 ERA, a 4.19 FIP, and an A-ball last year, which is where he made the majority of his starts. He was a 24-year-old pitcher in A-ball, and he had a 5.32 ERA and a 4.56 FIP. I don't really buy into Martin's early results so far at the major leagues, which are not good. They're not terrible either, but I think there's a regression coming his way. And then you look at something like Zips, who right now has him as a 5.39 ERA as his fair talent level. This could be a spot where we're just starting to see a pitcher who might not belong at the big league level really get hit hard by what I think is a really talented offense.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, who did you say?
Oh, I was just talking about Davis Martin. His minor league numbers, I was looking at them, they're really shitty. So I think there's a good chance that he just might suck. And his major league numbers, I think, might be covered up a little bit. One, by luck and small sample size, and then two, also, he's made a lot of his appearances out of the bullpen.
Yeah, as a starter this year, 16% strikeout percentage, 4.62 xFIP, 3.95 FIP.
Yeah, so we'll see. Davis Martin going forward, not a pitcher I think is going to find success. I like getting the Padres today, and a few more spots here to talk about. And then, guys, don't go anywhere. We've got NFL on the contrary right after this, and then more MLB content later in the day. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and next game here, Seattle Mariners, Oakland A's. Logan Gilbert on the mound for Seattle, and he is one of the more popular mid-range pitching options on the slate. If people are looking to save a little bit of money on DK with an SP2, Logan Gilbert's the guy a lot of people are gravitating towards, and it has a lot to do with the matchup against the Oakland A's. Ben Gilbert's a pretty talented pitcher in his own right with a 23% K rate. So maybe not as good this year as we thought he was going to be after his rookie year, but considering the matchup against Oakland, I get why people are going there. He makes sense to save salary with.
Yeah, he just kind of jumps off the page when you look at mid-range pitchers. If you look at our projections on DraftKings, we have the seventh highest projection on him. Every pitcher ahead of him is at least $9,600. Other than Kershaw, they're all at least 10,100. So he just really stands out. Now, we mentioned it when we talked about Fried. Joe Ryan fits this as well. Certainly guys that you can pivot to in that price range that do project similarly and give you a similar range of outcomes. We only have Gilbert like 0.3 of a point ahead of Fried and getting a lot more ownership. We have him like half a point ahead of Joe Ryan and getting more ownership. But he is the one that, really stands out there just from a really good matchup, really good park to pitch in. He's a solid pitcher. Like you said, maybe not as good this year as we were hoping, but still a 23% strikeout percentage, 3.75 xFIP. It's not like you're saying, oh, he's been disappointing. It's just like he didn't take a massive step forward like we thought he might, but he's still been very good. It's a really good matchup. It's a good park. So I think he's the best mid-range option. I do think he's probably pulling a bit more ownership than he should relative to guys like Fried.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm looking at this as well. And I don't know that Logan Gilbert would be my first consideration for cash games. I'd probably just try to find the salary to go all the way up to Corbin Burnes and Jacob deGrom, but there's still a lot of utility when it comes to Logan Gilbert. And then the other side of the game, Ken Waldichuk, pitching prospect, I think could have a really bright future, but he's been inconsistent so far at the big league level. So a 5.65 expected ERA, good stuff, but he's only managed a 20.6% K rate. The Seattle Mariners offense, who all of a sudden, Jared Kelenic, one of the former top hitting prospects in baseball, just kind of burned out, had to go back to the minor leagues. He's looked ridiculously good since getting called back up. I know that we don't have any Julio Rodriguez right now for Seattle, but the team is pretty cheap. They have really high top value odds for us, which has a lot of utility when we're trying to pay up for pitcher. Seattle is one of my highest priority stacks of the day right now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of upside here. The one thing I don't like about Seattle is that they're missing Julio Rodriguez, so the lineup just becomes a lot less appealing. But at the same time, they're pretty cheap. You have Dylan Moore with MPE, could be hitting towards the top of the order again at 3,100 against the lefty. Ty France has MPE now, which is nice, and he's reasonably priced. Mitch Haniger's got a bunch of power. You mentioned Kelenic, lefty here if he's in the lineup. But at 2,100, I just kind of like betting on the talent. Obviously, he, like you said, he had a bunch of struggles when he came up. It kind of seemed like he was trying to talk his way out of Seattle a month or so ago when they didn't call him up when rosters expanded and he scrubbed them from social media. But now he's up. He hit 2 home runs yesterday. Like I just don't mind taking a guy with that level of talent at 2,100 to offset some salaries. So I think Seattle looks good. I don't like the park. I do think Waldichuk is a talented pitcher, probably not ready for the majors yet. Limited sample so far in the majors, 246 expected ISO to righties, 195 to lefties. So I'm with you on being interested in the Mariners. 6% or 6.5% ownership, 4.5% chance of being the top stack, but also a 10% chance of being the top value. So they're going to be a team that gives you a pretty high projected lineup because you can get to them and you can get to those top end pitching.
Couple games left to talk about. The next one, Los Angeles Dodgers against the Colorado Rockies. And the Dodgers offense is going to bring a pretty interesting conversation into this slate because Chad Kuhl is a 5.22 expected ERA and 18.1% K rate. He's pretty clearly one of the worst pitchers on the slate, and the Dodgers offense probably the best in baseball. But here's where I kind of get hung up, and I haven't started building lineups yet. I do worry that I'm not going to be able to get to a lot of the Dodgers just because the expensive offense are what I'm prioritizing. And I would love to say, hey, it makes sense. Corbin Burnes and Jacob deGrom with 5-man Dodger stacks, but there's a salary cap. It isn't viable. So we do have the Dodgers with the second highest top stack odds on the slate. I would like to get to them, but there just aren't that many punt pitchers that I love on the slate, and that could make the pricing a problem.
Are you sure you can? So you can get to the Dodgers. You just can't get to the best Dodgers.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Like if you put in deGrom and Burnes on DraftKings, you have $3,475 per position. Bellinger, Taylor, Lux, Gallo are all 3,500 or less. It's just a matter of you can't run like Betts, Turner, Freeman, Smith, Muncy, deGrom, Burnes, but you can still get to the Dodgers. And you could probably, I would guess, pretty easily get like 2 of the top end guys, 3 guys from the bottom, and then you're just balancing it out with cheap stacks. So I do think they'll get some ownership. I think that'll probably be a pretty popular build, but it is a good spot against Kuhl. There's no real argument there. 180 expected ISO to righties, 199 to lefties this year. I think this is like a really good example though of the kind of spot where you like guys like Sandy Alcantara or Framber Valdez become a little bit more interesting because you're going to get ownership going to the Dodgers, and it's going to be a lot of, those 5-mans with that very similar build getting up to the ground Burns, or, you can just go to mid-range pitching and get a much better, 3-man with the Dodgers. So I think you just need to be aware of sort of what your entire lineup looks like, but the Dodgers do look like one of the best stacks on the entire slate.
Yeah, and we've got a super chat here from Eric Traub, and we will answer this at the end, Eric, because he says, if you have time at the end, can you please give me your top 2 stacks ownership agnostic and then top 2 stacks taking ownership into consideration? Yeah, we've got 1 game left after this, and we'll do a recap for you just of our favorite stacks as you laid it out there, and that's how we'll close out the show. But talking about Clayton Kershaw on the other side of this game now, 2.52 expected ERA, 27.4% K rate against Colorado. Rockies 2.7 implied team total, one of the lowest marks on the slate. Once again, I like Clayton Kershaw. He's a really good pitcher. I'm going to get some exposure to him, but he's going to fall behind Corbin Burns and Jacob deGrom in terms of high-end pitchers that I want to get to.
Yep, I agree. It's a really good spot. I'm expecting you'll get 6 innings from Kershaw. He's a good pitcher, 3rd highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 27.5%. He, I think, is just getting the ownership he deserves. He's like Darvish to me. Coming in around 15%, that makes sense. If he were lower, I would be saying, why is Kershaw so low? If he were higher, it would be like, okay, why are so many people playing him instead of deGrom and Burns? Just seems correct to me. He's a good play.
All right, final game here, San Francisco Giants against the Arizona Diamondbacks. And finally, a contrarian pitcher that I like getting to, Alex Cobb. Offers up as a little bit of salary savings. Briefly talked about him earlier in the show. He's a 3.23 expected ERA this year, 23.7% K rate. He's at home. It's a really pitcher-friendly park. He draws a decent matchup against the Diamondbacks. We'll only have a 3.3 implied team total. If you're saving money today on an SP2, does Alex Cobb make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Likely to give you, 90 to 100 pitches. He's a good pitcher. He struck out 23.7% of hitters this year. 2.97 xFIP is better than every pitcher on the slate except for deGrom, Burns, and Kershaw. The matchup against Arizona is kind of neutral. It's one that I don't love picking on now that they've called up a bunch of their top prospects. They actually have a pretty deep lineup. It's not easy to strike out. They have quality hitters, but it's still a good park. It's a really good pitcher in Cobb. He's not any sort of a priority for me, but he's certainly one of those guys where, if you are going to the Dodgers, like if you have deGrom, Dodgers, and you need a mid-range pitcher, but you don't want to go to Gilbert's ownership, then Cobb certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's how I'm seeing it as well. And on the other side, Merrill Kelly. I think I'd rather get to Cobb in this spot, and Kelly's another pitcher who I think could be looked at as serviceable relative to his price point. He's $8K over on DraftKings. FanDuel's had him a little bit more expensive. Hard to consider him at $9,400, but at $8,000 on DK, I think it's a playable price point. But one of those guys I just don't know that I'd ultimately end up getting to once I build lineups.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. 5% ownership, 7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. The park is good. The matchup is okay. 3.7 implied run total. On a lot of slates, I think you would see Merrill Kelly pulling ownership here, and he would be a really good play. On this slate, he's sort of just, if you're playing 150 tournament lineups and he lands in them here and there, he's fine. I wouldn't, be upset about it. But if I got none of him, I probably wouldn't even notice. Like, he's just so far down the list of guys that I care about on the slate.
Yeah, and then in terms of the offenses, it's going to be hard for me to consider either of them in this game.
Yeah, really, really tough sell for me on either offense.
All right, so let's answer Eric's question here, and then we will wrap up the show. So he wants to know, who are our favorite 2 stacks if we just don't consider ownership at all? One of them, I think, is very clearly the Philadelphia Phillies. If ownership was not in a play, any factor at all, I'd play the Phillies as much as possible. We also just have to be checking out for the weather there. As for the second one, I'll say the Angels against the Rangers. So, Adam, who are your 2 favorite stacks if we disregarded ownership?
So if the weather cooperates, Philly and the Dodgers. If the weather doesn't cooperate, then the Dodgers and the Angels.
And then the other part of his question is, who are our 2 favorite stacks if we're taking ownership into consideration? So one of them for me, I guess it depends like how I'm really weighing this. If I'm just talking like total contrarian offense, I do like taking shots on the Pirates as a really, really low owned team. The other one for me is going to be the Twins against Tyler Alexander. Just Alexander, I don't think is particularly good. We're getting a lot of salary savings on Minnesota. But Adam, I guess 2 contrarian offense or lower owned offenses you like today?
Blue Jays and Yankees.
All right, that does it for us, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out all the other content that we have. NFL on the Contraries next. We got the NHL NFL show, MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock. So all that stuff's coming up. Check out all of that. Good luck today.